Hello everyone, welcome to this series of videos about project initiation, and in this video I'm going to speak about stakeholder identification. So let's start by defining what stakeholders are. Stakeholders is basically an individual, group, or organization who may be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project. And this means that indeed there is a variety of stakeholders, even in small projects. Now, that does not mean all of them are important, but we'll talk about that in a bit. What I want you to remember for now is that typically we don't manage stakeholders. What we do is we manage the relationships with stakeholders, okay? And by managing this relationship, basically, this is what is normally called as politics, okay? The politics of the organization. So one of the first things we need to do is to identify the stakeholders and identify, in a way, which ones are the ones that may help us, which ones are the ones that we might perceive some difficulties from. Okay, so there's two major categories of stakeholders in this concern, and the first category is called stakeholders that are directly involved with the project. And these stakeholders, you need to include all of them when you create your list to organize your stakeholders communication. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And this includes people like decision makers, team members, customers, in case you have, sponsors in case you don't have, which just as a reminder, a project will normally have a client or a sponsor, normally not both. A client is someone basically that is paying you for the project, while a sponsor is someone that gave you the project. So for example, if I have a construction company and I get a client to make a remodeling of a house, then that is a client. On the other hand, if I have, for example, if I work in a company and my boss asks me to direct a project, then my boss is the sponsor. Okay, I'm not getting paid directly to do that project, let's say. Senior management is also a directly involved stakeholder. And obviously we have any functions that might be providing resources to our project. So besides that, there is additional stakeholders, and these ones you have to measure the ones that basically the ones that are applicable, because sometimes you have individuals or organization that are not directly involved but may affect your project. For example, just two quick examples. If you're doing a project that has to deal with specific laws or regulatory bodies, then they would be stakeholders. Or sometimes you're dealing with projects that will affect community groups or unions, and therefore they also become stakeholders. But there's many more besides this. There's many more other groups that could, or individuals that are not here listed, because these ones will really depend on the type of project that you have. So one of the things that we do to help us manage all this is to create a document called the Stakeholder Register. And the Stakeholder Register is basically a list of all your stakeholders, together with their contact information, with what is their goal, with what is the interaction strategy you're going to have. And I'm going to talk about each one of them in a little bit. Okay, and here, in order to understand the interaction strategy, we're going to use something that is called the Power Interest Matrix, which I will talk in a bit as well. So for example, in this case, what we have is we have 3 different stakeholders on my project. Obviously, this is not very realistic because normally we have dozens, if not hundreds of different stakeholders on projects. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to present 3 and how to do this table. When I do it, I make it very simple, to be honest. This is the basic one that I use. So I have the stakeholder name. In this case, I have Bender Bending Rodriguez, Hermes Conrad, and Turanga Lila. And then I have, for example, what is their goal. So for example, Bender is more interested that the project is done fast, while Hermes is more interested that the project is done at low cost, while Lila is more interested, for example, that the project achieves high quality. So we have 3 different stakeholders with 3 very different goals. Okay, and how do you get this goal? Normally by interviewing the stakeholders, or just by knowing what is it that they want. A lot of times one of the best things is to ask them directly what is their goal for this project. Okay, but a lot of times you have to dig a little bit deeper. So email address and phone numbers for these people, and here you have to be a little bit careful. This is not a table that you should give to everyone, because sometimes contact information can be a little bit personal or sensitive. And finally, you have your strategy. So for the strategy, I will talk in a little bit and how do you come up with what is the strategy to use for each one of your stakeholders. So regarding identifying what is the stakeholder strategy you should use, first of all, this model I'm going to use you is something of a strategy to manage your communication and your interaction with these stakeholders, okay? And it will help you to guide you to create a communication plan with all your stakeholders. And this is extremely important because, like I said, one of the things we don't do, we don't manage stakeholders, we manage the relationship with them. And how do you manage a relationship? Through the content of the information you provide and through the frequency of that information. And a lot of after this analysis, you might realize that some deliverables of your project might actually be changed based on who are the stakeholders you have. So there's four major strategies in terms of handling stakeholder information and interaction, okay, and they're described on this model over here. So this is called the power interest grid, and on the y-axis you basically have what the power component. What is power? Ability to affect your project, or ability to even affect as well your career. So someone might have low power or high power. Okay, then you have the interest. The interest is what is, well, basically, I think it's self-explanatory. What is the interest that the stakeholder has on your project? Does it have a low interest or does it have a high interest? Now, let's start with the most basic one, which is the strategy of monitoring. Monitoring basically applies when you have a group of individuals or a stakeholder that has low interest on your project and it has low power to affect your project. So we're not just going to ignore them, rather we're going to monitor them. And what monitor means that we're going to keep an eye on it, collect information in case the situation changes, because that person might get a promotion, that person might have a change in their life or in their career that makes your project all of a sudden of high interest, or that they now have high power over you, okay, or over your project. So monitor is indeed the easiest one, because all you have to do is, well, to monitor, is to check out how things are going and if there is any change. Next one we have is when you have someone that has low power but that has a very high interest on your project. And we use a strategy here called keep them informed. In other words, provide them with the necessary information they need to keep their interest up, because someone interested in your project is actually something positive. And therefore, you want to make sure that the interest they have indeed on your project that stays positive. So that for that, you need to provide them with what is the information they might need in order to keep that interest. But at the same time, be careful not to provide information that maybe is confidential or that is internal. Okay, so, and why is it important to keep them happy, keep them satisfied, because keep them informed, sorry, because again, from one day to another, their power situation might change and they might go from low power to high power. And if you simply ignore them, then that might not pay very well in the future. The third strategy we have is when you have people that have very high power or high power on to affect your project, but they have a low interest in your project. Now here, we call this strategy keep them satisfied or keep them happy. Whatever they request, make sure you do it professionally and quickly, and indeed that you satisfy whatever needs they have regarding your project. And why is that? Because right now they might not be very interested in your project, but that might change. And also the fact that they have a high power to affect it, again, you want to stay on the good graces of these people or these institutions. The last one we have is called manage closely. And manage closely is when you have people with high power and with high interest. That means you have to communicate them frequently and with a lot of information. And when we say frequently, it might be sometimes every day, or even in certain emergency projects might even be, for example, every hour. And this means that this strategy obviously is the one that consumes the most energy out of the manager, of the project manager. So what we see here is that monitor is the easiest one to do. Keep satisfied, keep informed is somewhere in the middle in terms of effort, and the hardest one to do is manage closely. When I say hardest one to do, obviously is the fact that you're going to spend much more time with people that are in this category than with others. So most of your time should be dedicated to people that fall under the category of manage closely. Then you should dedicate some time to people that fall under the category of keep satisfied and keep informed. And finally, you dedicate a little bit of time to the people that are under the category of monitor. So to summarize, stakeholders are indeed important for the project. They might affect your project, or they might just be interested in the project. You're not going to manage them, but what you're going to do is to manage those communications. In order for you to do that, two major steps are important. Number one, make sure you identify your stakeholders. Number two, what is the strategy you're going to use with them? Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have any questions, just drop it on the comment section below.